Hello, Dr. Flavio here. I am so honored to have the opportunity to share these ideas with you because over the last 22 or so years, I've had the opportunity to help thousands of people improve the quality of their lives. It is such an honor to see, I've worked with people, for instance, who were not even alive when I started working here. Young people who were not even around when I started. I've worked with people who years ago whom I have seen recently, and I have seen how their lives have flourished. I have been honored to participate in the rekindling and the reconnection between parents and children who are stranded, who are lost, and they reconnected. I've been able to help couples reunite and all kinds of other awesome opportunities because in the movies when people go through their struggles and at the end it all works out and they're happy forever and so forth, sometimes in actual life it doesn't quite happen that way. But for the people who come over to the office and work with us, fortunately or luckily or a lot of the times that is exactly what has happened. And it is just so beautiful to watch people succeed and be happy. So as a result of working with these thousands and thousands of people, not just therapeutic here at the office, but also at our school, where we share with people, where we teach some of the very same principles that I'm going to be sharing with you here today. We also do that at the school. And in therapy alone, I've had the honor, the privilege of helping over 3,000 professionals become therapists themselves. And I can tell you that the exposure, the work, the volume of work that we have done has been instrumental in helping us develop a few ideas that time has proven to be effective. In other words, over time we've seen that applying those ideas a certain way does result in the improvement of the quality of people's lives. So now the time has come to share these ideas with you, and I'm happy that you're here. So thank you again for requesting this resource, and let's embark on this journey together. Let's keep an open mind. I don't expect you to agree with everything that I say. Frankly, it's not important if you agree or disagree. What I do invite you to do is to keep an open mind and always remember that there is a voice inside of each one of us. I call this the inner self. There's a voice inside of each one of us that we cannot ignore for very long. We can ignore it sometimes for some time, but not forever. And it really doesn't matter if you agree with everything that I say or not. And by the way, I am perfectly aware of the fact that I don't have the whole truth. I don't have the truth. I don't claim to have the truth. I don't claim to know it all. I claim to have learned a few ideas that have been effective in helping other people achieve better lives. And I'm freely sharing these ideas with you, that's all. But I'm also eager to learn. I'm a constant student of life and people and success and relationships. So it is possible that as you listen to me, it is very, very much possible that you know more about certain topics than I do. And I very much welcome and invite and beg you that you share what you know with me and with all of us, because this is how we all learn and grow. But as I tell my students in the classroom, your real teacher isn't I. Your real teacher is your inner self. And the one area in life where we've had the great fortune of being effective at helping others succeed is in the area of helping people get in touch with their inner selves. That has been a very, very fascinating part of the work that we do here, because I know that although we out here can make mistakes, your inner self will never steer you wrong. So if we can help you get in touch with your real self, you'll be fine. And that is my mission. My mission is to help you get in touch with your inner self, because from there on, everything is going to be great. Okay? So thank you very much. Let's dig into this and let's take a look at these concepts and let's have fun with it. Thank you. The first thing that people often ask me people ask me what do I do, and I talk to them about the mirror of the self. People often ask, well, what the heck is that? It's like the mirror of the self. Well, we're all familiar with the concept of a mirror, of course. And if I were to ask you what is a mirror, you would say, well, it's a flat piece of glass, sometimes plastic, that is silver coated in the back and it reflects light and I can see myself, and I use a mirror to know what they look like. And that's true, of course. But there's a more important use of the mirror, and we use it that way all the time, but perhaps we're not, I want to point your attention to this, which is that we use the mirror not just to see what we look like, but to make adjustments in what we look like. You see, we use the mirror as a source of feedback into our appearance so that I can then make adjustments. So if I look and I see that my clothes are off to one side or something, I can see that on the mirror and then I immediately make adjustments. I was just looking into the mirror right now to make sure that the microphone was positioned adequately. You see, so we look onto the mirror as a source of feedback, and according to what we get from the mirror, according to what we see, we make adjustments. But the typical mirror that we're used to, the piece of glass with the silver coating in the back, only reflects our outer appearance. Now in the movies, particularly if you've seen the Snow White movies and many other movies, supposedly for children, and I think those movies are awesome philosophy lessons. In the movies, they have magic mirrors on the wall, right? And magic mirrors supposedly talk back to you, and they reflect back to you not just aspects of your physical appearance, but also elements of your character. Magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Oh, I'll tell you, Snow White is, that type of thing. And we look at that and we say, oh, what a silly cartoon for kids, whatever. But here's the question. Mystics have used the mirrors forever as a tool to get in touch with themselves. And not only that, the most amazing mirror of them all is the set of relationships that we all partake in. We don't just have one, because the word relationship, when I talk about relationships, people often think of like a romantic relationship, like a spouse, a partner, a conjugal relationship, like a lover of some type, right? And clearly that is one type of relationship. But we have relationships not just with people, but with more intangible ideas as well. We have relationships with authority. We have a relationship with some concept of God. Even if you think it doesn't exist, there's a relationship there with a non-existent thing. We have a relationship with the body, with food, with wealth, with money, with country. You see? So we have relationships with objects. Have you ever met people who purchase things and everything breaks in their hands? Whether it's because they have this anger thing and they transmit the anger to the objects, and other people, they have things that last forever, nothing breaks in their hands. So there's a definite relationship with the objects around ourselves as well. And the point is that if you really want to know what you are like, you see, I have to start off with this idea that we don't really know what we are like. We think we do. We create a myth about ourselves. We create a story to convince ourselves that we are a certain way that oftentimes isn't the way we are. But now if you want to know what you are actually like as a human being, not just your physical appearance, which you can do with a physical mirror, but what you're actually like as a human being, if you want to know that, you're going to have to use the mirror of the self, which is the reflection that you get from your various relationships. You see, if we were very simple entities with just one facet, then I could have just one mirror reflect back to me that part of myself. Such is the case with the physical appearance. So I could have one relationship, let's say with one person, and observing the effect that I have on that person and the feedback that I get from that person, that would constitute a mirror of sorts. But we're not simple entities. We're very complex entities with many, many, many facets. And because we have many facets, we require many types of relationships. And a careful observation of each one of those relationships reveals to us a different facet of who we are. I came up with this explanation, I think in 2006, when I put out a book on the philosophy of therapy. And this image came to my mind when I was writing the book on, I remember when I was a kid in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the disco movement was in full swing, right, in full force. And in discotheques, as they used to call them back then, the one essential object or tool you must have, and I'm telling you this because we had little miniature discotheques at home, we have the flashing lights and the strobe lights and, and all the kids at that age, if you wanted to be popular, you had to get your gear so that we could put parties on in the weekends and stuff, And I did have some flashing lights, but I never got this one thing, which is really the key to the whole disco thing, and that is the disco ball. And it was a styrofoam ball with a whole bunch of little pieces of mirror glued to it. And then what you would do is mount that from the ceiling with a motor, rotating it slowly, and then shine a beam of light onto it. So what would happen is each one of those mirrors would reflect a light, and it would be rotating around the disco floor, all these little points of lights all over the walls and the floor. It was actually a beautiful effect, right? The so-called disco ball. Well, when I was writing the book on the philosophy of therapy, that image came to my mind, and I said, what would it be like if this disco ball were actually like a huge sphere, and you and I were at the very center of it? And these little pieces of mirrors, each in every direction that I would look, I would see a particular facet of my body, right? There would be all these little pieces of mirrors all the way around, from the bottom, from the top, the sides, the back, the front. But because they're individual pieces of mirror at different angles, I would be seeing different images on each one of them. Each one of those little pieces of mirror would reflect a different image, a different aspect of what I look like. And that image became kind of a something that we talk about all the time in this context, because this disco ball that we're inside of really represents our own universe. And each one of those little pieces of mirrors represents one of our relationships. Evidently, we have relationships that are more intense than others, such as the conjugal, parents, children, the closest people to you. But remember, we have many other types of relationships that are not even with people. And each one of those does reflect a part, an aspect of who we really are. We have to pay attention to them all to get the feedback, to see what we're really like, but not just to know what I'm like. That's not what leads to evolution and growth. What leads to evolution and growth is taking that as feedback and making adjustments, just as we use a physical mirror to see what I look like and make adjustments to improve on my appearance, right? Isn't that what we have mirrors for? So, as we get more and more into these discussions, you're going to discover, perhaps you already know this, I say discover, you and I together are going to discover this, but this may be something that you already know, and that is that most people out there are quite frustrated. I've been a student of life my whole life. I started reading these books when I was 13 years of age, and I've read voraciously my whole life. My hobby is to read about other people's lives and all this, and I work full-time as a therapist for over 22 years. I'm a teacher. So I've been around these ideas for a long time, and I have observed that most people are somewhat frustrated and unhappy. Now, most people kind of put on a front, a public front. We're going to be talking more about this. This creates a certain kind of dissociation, like two selves, the inner self and the outer self. And within that dissociation, within that duality, is the terrain where all of our problems are bred. In fact, when a person comes in here, the more separated they are from themselves, the more problems they have. And people say, well, can you work with me for this problem or that problem? And the answer is always yes, because all problems are really the result of this dissociation and separation. Meaning that when we get the two parts of ourselves back together, when we reintegrate our two selves, then the problems go away by themselves. So, one of the things that you're going to discover, as I was saying earlier, is that in this frustration of ours, that is very common in our world, right? We often fantasize about better relationships. If only I had better children, if I had a better spouse, if I had better neighbors, if I had a better government, better police force, better this, better that. We think of, if only the conditions outside of us were better, I would be happier. Well, what we learn is that in order to have a better relationship, in order to have better children, we have to become better parent. In order to have a better wife, we have to be a better husband. In order to have a better husband, you have to become a better wife. In other words, we take the feedback from where you're at today, your life as it is today, and we use that as clues to reveal to ourselves what areas of our lives are deficient in growth and development. And then we go to work on ourselves. We grow, we develop ourselves. And I have seen this over and over and over. Magically, our relationships become better. The people in our lives change. And people often tell me, wow, I cannot believe this is pure magic. What have you done? They think I'm some sort of, and I tell them, no, I haven't done anything. You have done all the work. You have changed. And as a result, the people around you have changed as well. We're doing great. Thank you. All right, so if you have been listening to me carefully, you may have discovered something that I haven't quite said, but it is true. And that is that every relationship in our lives has a purpose. You see, often we don't think about relationships as having a purpose. We often think of relationships as happening based on what I call the chance hook model. The chance hook model. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Suppose we are talking about a romantic type relationship. So you don't have a girlfriend, a boyfriend, let's say, and you're just shopping for groceries one day, and you're walking around the grocery store, and you see, let's say, I'm a man, so let's say we're talking about a man, and this man is walking around, and he sees a woman, and by chance, you see, she happened to be at the same aisle where he was, and he was kind of kneeling down to look at this box of cookies, and she kind of tripped over him, and she said, I'm sorry, excuse me, and the jar of tomatoes fell off her hand, and he helped her up, and that type of thing. By chance, they were brought together, and they were made to interact with one another. But then there's a hook. See, nature provides a hook. Well, he likes her. She's attractive. She smiles broadly. She finds him interesting and helpful because he helped her pick up the tomatoes off the floor. You see? So there's a hook there. So most relationships function based on the chance hook model. They start on the chance hook model. And so then people say, well, we just met and we liked each other. In this particular case, the hook is some sort of pleasure. But in other kinds of relationships, the hook, the chance hook model also applies, but it's not always pleasure, the hook. For instance, you are driving down the street and somebody cuts you off, and chance, right? What are the chances that you would be at that same road at that same time where this other guy was there, and he cuts you off and you get upset and you get off the car? You see, now there's a hook. Now there's resentment, there's upsetness, there's anger. You see, now you're hooked together and you have a relationship now. It might be based on violence and anger and hatred. And that relationship might even lead to somebody's death. But it is a relationship. We don't think of it that way, right? But there is a relationship there. They're entangled. So chance brought them together. And the hook, in this case, may have been some sort of disagreement or anger. So most relationships we think of being the result of the chance hook model. And therefore, we don't think that there's an actual purpose for each relationship. But I assure you that there is a purpose. Every single relationship in our lives is there to reflect back to us a part of who we are and to help us grow and become better human beings. There are many ways of describing this purpose, and we're going to be talking about 3 different ways of understanding this. But what we call the chance hook model is nothing more than the hands of destiny, making sure that we meet the right people at the right time under the right circumstances for the purpose to be manifested. So I assure you, although this might be impossible to prove, I assure you that every single relationship in your life is not accidental. There's a reason, there's a purpose why that person is there, why that boss, that job, that neighbor, why not the other neighbor? Why this neighbor? In other words, why is your life as it is? There's a purpose, there's a reason. So people ask me, well, what is the reason? What is the purpose? And we can talk about this in different languages. One language is we could say, well, the purpose is for us to learn to love. Because most of us don't really love in the full sense of the word. We have a very restricted model and understanding of what we mean by love. We say that we love our spouses, our children, and certain people around ourselves. But the truth is that it is impossible to love one person unless we love them all, because love is something that emanates from us. So in the Course of Miracles, for instance, you may be familiar with the Course of Miracles, they talk about this concept of special relationships where we have this agreement with this person and they kind of scratch our backs a certain way and we scratch their back a certain way. We kind of trade favors in a certain way, And as long as that trade is working, we kind of mask that up, we dress that up with the words, I love you. And as soon as that agreement stops, then we say, well, I no longer love you. I fell out of love. And in these courses that we offer to people and in these programs that we offer, we talk a lot about romantic relationships and the cycles that relationships go through and how interesting it is that a person would say, well, I no longer love you. That concept is impossible because if you ever loved the person, it is impossible not to love anymore. Love is eternal. So by definition, when we say, well, I no longer love you, by definition what we're saying is I never did, except that at one time it was pleasant to be around you, and now that I discovered that I must actually grow, is no longer pleasant, so my excuse is I no longer love you, let me go find somebody else. I know that this kind of speak might be a little bit harsh for some of you. I don't mean any disrespect or any offense, of course, I'm here to serve you. But it is impossible to serve you unless I speak the truth as I see it, and that is the truth as I see it. So this thing that we call love is a profound desire for the other person, whoever that is, a child, an adult, an elderly, the neighbor, the grocery guy, the other, whatever, is a profound sense of light that emanates from us towards that person, and oftentimes we don't feel that feeling towards others. And if we don't feel it towards others, sometimes we don't feel it not even towards ourselves, towards anybody, So The purpose of relationships could be said, well, one way to say it is, the purpose is to learn to love, because we are on this planet for a reason, for a purpose. Nothing is accidental, nothing is by chance. There's a purpose, there's a reason. We're here for a reason. And we must learn to love. And the instrument or the school that life gives us to learn to love is the various relationships that we have. Another way of saying the same thing is that relationships serve the purpose of helping us forgive both one another and, more importantly and more difficult, the purpose of forgiving ourselves. That is really, really difficult. That is really tough. Once again, if you are familiar with the Course of Miracles, we talk about this for months, because it is such a difficult concept. Very easy to understand mentally, intellectually, but very difficult to practice. Because deep at the level of the unconscious or the subconscious, we feel guilt. We're not guilty, but we feel guilty. And, oftentimes, if you ask a person, well, do you feel guilty? They say, of course not. I haven't done anything wrong. That's what we say consciously. But for instance, if they go into a state of deep hypnosis, oftentimes they cry strongly because they feel so guilty. They're not guilty, but they feel guilty. Please notice the difference. We feel this guilt for having done all these bad things. And later on, I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I have had to learn in my own personal life. And it has everything to do with that. The damage, the pain that we have caused others to feel. And it is very difficult to get past that. So, learning to forgive each other and ourselves is another way of saying the purpose for relationships. And there's another way of saying it. For some of you, the word karma and dharma are familiar. And every relationship brings with it a karmatic element. We're brought together to burn through some karma, And so one way to say this would be to say that each one of those relationships have the purpose of helping us move from karma to dharma. In other words, it is the same thing as learning to love or learning to forgive, but we can say the same thing in so many different ways, right? So there's a purpose there. And it's interesting because some relationships, like some marital relationships, at least in the movies, historically, we are aware of relationships that are not based on the chance hook model, but they're based on what we think is an intention a priori. I'll give you an example. Here in the part of the country I'm in South Florida, it is somewhat common to hear people looking for an arranged marriage for the purpose of immigration. In other words, this is not something that I condone or suggest. As far as I know, it's illegal. I don't. But I'm just saying, people sometimes tell me, "Oh, I married so and so for papers," And in those examples, in the old days, monarchs, royalty, they used to marry and have children, not for the purpose of necessarily love, but oftentimes for the purpose of continuing a blood lineage or combining fortunes or kingdoms, So then you would say, you see, there's an intention there that has nothing to do with love or forgiveness. You see, what happens is that what we think, there's this paradox in life. You see, even when we think that we are imposing our own agenda onto life itself, in other words, I didn't meet by chance. I specifically went out looking for that person so they could give me papers, so I could become a citizen of this country, let's say, right? I wouldn't do this. I'm just saying, as an example, people would say this. We think that we chose the person, we paid the person, we think that there's an intention there that has nothing to do with the chance hook model. In reality, that is exactly what's happening. Those are the hands of destiny at work. And we think we chose the person, but destiny chose it for us. And we're going to have to live an experience with that person, even if we're paying them. And that experience is going to be instrumental in your development as a human being. We're doing great. Thank you. So we've been talking about the fact that relationships have a purpose, and the purpose is to learn to love, to learn to forgive, to move us from karma to dharma, however you want to describe this. But there's a definite purpose there, and each one of our relationships does reflect a different part of ourselves so that we can make adjustments. In other words, we are not exactly the way we think we are, and by observing the effect that we have on others and the way others respond to us, we can liken the relationship to a mirror in the sense that each one of these relationships reflects back to us a vision of ourselves that otherwise we would not have. And this is the reason why nobody can really live isolated for very long. As a matter of fact, I was telling a student the other day in class, have you noticed that in our penal system, I think this is horrible, of course, but have you noticed that the highest form of punishment we've come up with over the years is something called solitary confinement? Why is it that it's so difficult for us humans? You know, jail itself doesn't seem to be for some people all that bad. Some people seem to discover a community in there and they live and they make a life in there, right? But then solitary confinement is a whole different story. I have worked with people who have been in prison, and they tell me that solitary confinement, in some cases, they have been in that situation. It is, they say, is the worst thing that can happen. You kind of go crazy in there, not talking to anybody. So the point I'm making is that we all need the feedback and the reflection off of others to understand who we are. And in the absence of that, we kind of go crazy. So the question is, how can we basically use our relationships to discover who we are and also to help the other person or the other entity to evolve as well? And we have to use something called dialogue. Dialogue, the concept of dialogue, the word dialogue comes from the Greek dialogos. It means finding a higher truth. You know, dialogue doesn't necessarily happen between two people. It doesn't come from two. Dialogue, dialogos, is a process of searching for a higher truth. In other words, if you and I are having a true dialogue, you and I both acknowledge that neither one of us has a truth as high as the one you and I could achieve together. So the assumption is, I have a piece of the puzzle, you have a piece of the puzzle, but if we combine them through this process of dialoguing, we're both going to attain a higher version of the truth than we could individually or separately. That's what a true dialogue is. So in therapy, for instance, people, let's just take the case of a couple, a married couple, let's say, who comes in for marital therapy, let's say. And one of the first things I ask them is, you know, tell me what your conversations are like, your dialogue are like. And they tell me, oh yeah, we talk all the time. And when I talk to these people individually, and I ask them, okay, tell me about the last conversation you had. And it was either about the grocery list or about the bills they have to pay. And the point I'm making is they're not dialoguing. And that's exactly why they're here at the office. You see, a dialogue isn't just a casual conversation or a conversation about to-do lists. It's much more than that. If we could have a dialogue with within each one of our relationships, we would discover the purpose of the relationship. We would be able to grow as a result of the relationship. We would be an instrument in the growth of the other entity if we could actually dialogue. And yet, most of us are not dialoguing. It's not enough to be chatting or talking. We have to actually dialogos. We have to actually search for higher truth. So in this particular opportunity that you and I have together here today, let's cover two things that typically happen, two extreme opposites that typically happen in a relationship, and let's find a way to fix that. There are many, many more things that we can talk about later, but these are two typical ones. One is, in both cases, we're not dialoguing. In one case, the relationship is defined by a constant screaming match. People are just going crazy at each other. They're not talking, they're not conversing, they're not dialoguing, but they're offending, screaming. Every interaction they have is an opportunity to offend some more. That's one extreme. The other position is one in which they're simply not, they're ignoring one another. So this is very common among brothers, sisters, parent, child, married couples. We haven't spoken in 2 years, they tell me. We don't talk at all. I haven't called my father, I haven't called my mother, that type of thing. There's no talking whatsoever. Those two positions, although they seem very different, because in one, they're interacting all the time and screaming, they seem very different, but in reality, they amount to the same thing. They're completely polarized and stranded from one another. They're not really interacting at all. So let's take the first example. They're screaming too much. The first thing we have to do in this case, if you find yourself in this position, is what I call stop the madness. We have to learn to stop the madness. Don't offend, don't scream, don't call the person names. In other words, we have to stop the madness. So people tell me, yeah, but dude, if you only knew, the problem isn't me. The problem is that he or she is always screaming and offending me. And I'll tell you, nobody can really offend you continuously if you stay quiet and calm. The reason why the madness continues is because we do add fuel to the fire in the form of our responses. So you can insult me for a while and I stay quiet. Eventually, I insult you back. And when I do that, I'm working really hard on never doing that again, but I'm just saying the times that I did that, the moment that I insult you back, that adds fuel to the fire. Now you feel justified in offending me some more. So stopping the madness doesn't mean that you're going to change the other person's behavior. Stopping the madness means that you're going to change your behavior. You're simply going to refuse to engage in the madness. And if the person chooses to insult you continuously, you're going to remain still and calm. And you say to me, but how can I do that? Well, internally, in your mind, in your heart, you're going to be basically reminding yourself that you're a divine human being who deserves to be happy, who deserves to heal. And mentally and spiritually, you're going to be blessing that person. And you might say to me, but how do you expect me to bless a person who's offending me? Well, that's exactly what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to emanate feelings and thoughts of blessings, good thoughts, good feelings towards the person, even when they're offending you. Because, let's face it, blessing somebody who's loving you is very easy. Blessing a person who's loving you is equivalent to lifting no weight at all. Your muscles don't grow. Your muscles grow when you lift heavy weights that you can hardly handle, right? And you overcome the law of gravity there, and you lift the weights, and your muscles kind of tear up a little bit microscopically, and that's how you become stronger. Isn't that so? Isn't that the whole principle of weight training? So the equivalent for your heart is when you're able to bless somebody when they're actually offending you. That's like the weight, that's like the resistance, because the temptation when they're offending you is to scream back at them. But the moment we do that, we're degenerating, we're not growing. Your heart grows to the degree that you're able to bless somebody precisely when they are offending you, when they're doing you wrong. Okay, so no more joining the madness. You're going to learn to stay quiet and bless that person. Eventually, it might take a long time or not. I'm only here with you today because I have done all of this in my life. I've been able to achieve all of this. And eventually, the other person, I don't get it perfect all the time. I don't mean to suggest that. But I have been able, by practice, by diligent practice, I have been able to achieve each one of the results that I'm sharing with you right now. And I don't mean this, to suggest any sort of superiority or anything. I'm simply explaining that what I'm sharing with you isn't just a theory. It is a theory that I have been able to practice and master. And that is why I stand here and share these ideas with you, because it's perfectly possible to do so. Even if it's not perfect, okay? Start where you're at. Do as much as you can. And in time, you become better and better at it. Okay, so when we stand still and observe the person offending us and screaming at us, and we do not respond in kind, we simply internally remind ourselves of our own divinity and bless that person, meaning internally, mentally, we sort of remind them of their own divinity and how they don't have to do that, because in reality, you come to learn they're not really offending you, they're degrading themselves, and you don't want that for them. It's not about you, it's about them. You want to rescue them. It's like a parent, it becomes, something like a parent watching a child hurt himself, bang his head against the wall. You as a parent wouldn't want your child to do that. You would want to rescue the child. Well, when a person is continuously offending you, it becomes like that child banging his head on the wall. You want to protect the child from degrading himself further. And the way to do that is to stay perfectly still. Because the moment I respond and say, yeah, but look at you, the moment I do that, I give them a justification to continue degrading themselves. You won't do that anymore. And this is what I mean by stopping the madness. I want to remind you, I want to tell you that you can absolutely do this, because the number one person who failed at this most of his life was I. And yet I was able to achieve this. So, if it was difficult for me, because it was very difficult for me to stay quiet. I used to pride myself in having a quick tongue, a sharp tongue. And if you're going to offend me, I'm better at offending you twice as much, and that type of thing. I grew up in an environment like this. It's nobody's fault. But I valued my ability to offend and demoralize others. And then I learned. And when I learned the theory at first, I knew that that was not a cool thing to do. I knew that that wasn't going anywhere. And yet there was a habit, you see. And it took years and years and years to overcome the habit. But I did, which means that you can as well. So stopping the madness. Because once you stop the madness within yourself, the other person has no choice but to stop the madness as well. And then you can look at a person kindly and say, would you like to talk? And I'll guarantee you, at some point, sooner or later, a dialogue will ensue, will take place. Start where you're at. The dialogue doesn't have to be for hours and hours. Start talking to that person. Who are you? What's going on with you? How can I be of assistance in your journey to become a better human being? What is it that you would like from me? You see? And you begin to talk to the person, whether it's a child, a spouse, a husband, a wife, a neighbor, a brother, a sister, it doesn't matter. But you begin talking. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who have not talked sometimes in years. And that's madness as well. And what I'm asking you to do is to approach the person not with a request, but with an offer. You see, most people, when they haven't talked for a while and they're stranded, they approach the person saying, well, what's wrong with you that you're not talking to me? That's the madness that I'm talking about. That is not conducive to a dialogue. So what I'm asking you to do is to approach the person by saying, how is it going for you? We haven't talked in a while. I'm wondering how you are doing. Is there any way in which I could contribute to your journey on this life? Is there any way that I could help you Is there anything that you need? How are you doing? You know, and you might tell me, dude, if I could do that, I would, but I can't because I'm so pissed off. And pardon the language, but this is the language that people use in therapy. Therapy is a very raw thing. People express what they really feel, you know? And sometimes it's like, dude, I'm pissed off at this guy, you know? What do you mean I'm going to offer help? I want to do away with this guy, you know? People tell me this all the time. And I tell them, I understand you. I've been there too. I've been there too, I know. That's why I'm here talking to you, because I've been there. And yet, we can learn to put our own anger aside, our own resentment aside. We can practice something called forgiveness, because you see, forgiveness isn't a favor that you're doing to the other person who has offended you. Forgiveness is a favor that you're doing to yourself. You're liberating yourself from a mountain, from a load that you've been carrying. And you totally have the right to let go of this load and improve the quality of your life. So you're going to forgive yourself for whatever contribution you had to this situation that you're having with this person, and you're going to approach that person and say, hi, how is it going for you? You know, I'm interested in finding out how it's going for you and if there's anything I can do for you. And you might say to me, well, the person didn't call me back, the person didn't respond, the person didn't talk back to me. I totally have been there, you know, but the lack of a response from the other person won't change your resolve to be civil and to be loving to that person. You're going to continue approaching the person. It doesn't matter how many times you get rejected. With the same kindness, with the same heart. I've had to do all of this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here telling you this. It is possible. And at the end of the day, it is an exercise in your own self-development, your own self-growth, and your own spiritual growth. All right? So what I'm asking you to do is to look at your relationships. And right now, we just talked about two extreme opposite situations that amount to the same thing, amount to madness. And I'm asking you to do, what I'm asking you to do is to stop the madness and develop the ability to dialogue with the most difficult people in your life. You will succeed eventually, and you're going to learn a whole lot about yourself by looking at the other person. All right, let's begin there. And if you have any questions, any comments, please let me know. We're going to continue discussing these things because this is going to, you're going to discover this is a lifelong journey of self-discovery and self-development. Relationships are the mirror of the self. And just like we look into the mirror every day to fix our hair, adjust our clothing, whatever, we're going to look at our relationships daily for feedback, for a reflection on how well we're doing in our own self-development path, in our own spiritual growth path, all right? So this is a lifelong journey, and we're going to have a great time with it. Thank you so much.